Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today we've got a really interesting conversation. We have on Mariana Cogan. And Mariana, you are a CMO, a B2B CMO. You were actually an award-winning B2B CMO. And I want you to talk a little bit about this because you actually won Forrester's Program of the Year. Right? That's bringing different elements of sales and marketing, different things together, right? And congratulations on that. I want you to talk a little bit more about that. You're working on really interesting things like the democratization of content creation. You're not accepting the status quo, let's put it that way. Today, specifically, what we're talking about is how to achieve success by thinking like an investment banker. That's a different point of view than we've had before. But before we start into that, could you maybe give us a little bit more on the program of the year from Forrester and what you're doing and thinking? And let's know a little bit more about Mariana, and then we'll dive right in.
Perfect. Sounds like a plan. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to join you today. It's always exciting to talk about different marketing topics. And to your point, yes, it was very exciting winning Forrester Program of the Year. I always tell people that it's like winning the Oscars in the revenue space. What we were looking is, we had three challenges. This is when I was working at PTC, large multi-billion-dollar global company, many products, many GTMs, land and expand, big enterprise deals. We had transition we had transitioned just into a subscription model. So we had to really start thinking about marketing and sales in a different way. So we were really solving primarily for three topics. We were casting the net too wide from a marketing perspective. And you know that when you cast the net too wide, especially for a mature company where you know where you're selling into, you're wasting resources. There's no need anymore. You're not a startup that you're trying to see, let me see, who can I do business with? By now, you know where you're looking to sell into, but we were casting the net too wide. Then in an alignment with sales, we didn't really have enough account intelligence. And again, for a company that is so complex and sells really large deals, you have to have account intelligence. And then thirdly, we were not meeting the customer when the customer was. And again, and I'll talk a little bit more about it afterwards if we're getting to, but we were not really being customer-centric, customer first. We were thinking as if B2B was building to building, when in reality, it's people to people, it's human to human. We sell to humans that happen to be in a building, and that's even before pandemic, let alone these days. But so we're looking to solve for those three challenges after some good internal negotiations, very strong alignment with my sales side. We went to buy technology for delivering intent. So we bought from 6 Sense for intent, then account intelligence through People AI. And then we got chat so that we could talk when people wanted to talk with us rather than having them waiting until we pass the leads. So by implementing this program, we deliver about $20 million on the first POC. I think it was maybe in 4 months. We went to look the net, casting the net less wide allows to get a lot of credibility with the sellers because now you're passing them wide conversations. We going to look alike. We went to do a lot of things of this nature. So it was very exciting.
You know, I've had lots of conversations on this podcast with CROs that are in deep agreement with this is sometimes it's better to restrict pipeline instead of trying to expand pipeline. It's the exact opposite of what we think is the intelligent strategy. But that's what you were talking about doing, right? Is you had too much, you were bloating the pipeline with leads that weren't correct for the organization. So therefore your ability to satisfy them as customers, reduce churn, grow NRR, grow revenue, all of that, and waste resources internally. That's what happens. And then you have sales team that isn't even meeting quotas. You have people that are turning, you're incurring costs on bringing new people and training them and getting somebody up to speed takes 6, 7, 8, 9 months before they're at their full capacity. The negative impact of a bloated pipeline is intense. So I love hearing more about this.
Yeah, it costs you a lot of money. And this is where you start thinking a little bit more as an investment banker, in the sense that you really get to pay much more attention to your conversion rates. It's not just about producing, as you said, buckets and buckets of whether you want to call them leads, MQLs, conversations, any way you want to call them. It is about the quality of the pipeline, is the quality, because by now you know your personas. We know so much. We have so much account intelligence, especially now in sense with AI, that it is about really producing quality so that you get into operational efficiency. But if you're as a marketeer, stop at that point where you say, I put in loads of top of the funnel conversations. Okay, but what is your conversion rate? You don't want to be having like more and more, because it's just expensive. Anytime that you're sending poor quality pipeline with the wrong persona in the wrong industry. I think I learned this long time ago. I was working more like industry marketing, and we put all this effort into selling in one deal, it's in telecoms. But we were not a telecoms kind of a company. So yes, we closed it. It was a wonderful logo, but then it churned. And all that effort, we could have put it on something else that would have gotten us very good case studies, good references, and it would have been a land and expand. It would have been really, again, thinking as an economist, much more of that multiplier effect, rather than thinking about, okay, I'm going to produce one thing. And though that myopic view sometimes also creates some challenges.
So here's what I'm really interested in, right? Because it's easy to see how we get there, right? Because every company we have, especially the sales team, the CRO, the CEO, the board is thinking quota, right? You go to the board meeting, they're like, how are we doing against quota this quarter? How is next quarter looking? So there is a very intense focus on quota attainment. Nobody's saying tracking those KPIs in quality quota attainment, right? So there's this idea of we have to expand sales. So expanding our ICP, expanding our pipeline is what we need to do. But how did you articulate the story internally that everybody nodded their head and didn't just say, how are we doing against the quota, but started saying, how are we being more efficient about growing our pipeline with the right ICP so we don't waste expenses? That's not an easy task. How did you accomplish that internally?
It is a complicated conversation, and I think that it really has to start with a strong alignment with your sellers. And I know it's right now a conversation that it's always marketing and sales alignment, and we all do marketing and sales alignment, but I think it's really taking it beyond that, especially when you're working in companies that are very enterprise driven. It's a little bit different if you're in PLG, if you're much more in performance marketing, but especially when you're talking about those larger organizations with the larger deals, you really have to be in the trenches with your sellers. I tend to talk about, from a marketing team, I always say we are in accountability, ownership, and sales empowerment. And it really means that you have to be in the trenches with your sellers. They're the ones who know the personas. And as you are working that closely with them, you start aligning on the same KPIs. You do have your marketing ones, yes. My very early KPIs, of course, if I'm doing an event, how many people get registered, all those sort of activities. We have a website, the PPC, you name it. There's a lot of the early marketing KPIs that absolutely, they're super, super important. But then after that, you really need to start thinking about pipeline coverage. You cannot build a mature organization if you're going to be requiring more than a 3x. If you have to get into the 5x and the 6s and the 7x's, then it's a lot of work that is going to cost a lot of money for relatively smaller results. So every time that we do these kind of projects are a little bit more revolutionary on how we do things, we align with our sellers, but not just as a conversation, but we start looking into win rates. after we finished the pilot that I was mentioning to you, we were also to increase the win rate, increase the deal size. So therefore, you need less opportunities to deliver more because you're talking about less winning quality. Of course, nobody wants less if you're going to be given the same garbage. Then you have to give a lot of garbage. You can't quite say just, I'm going to produce less of the same quality of what I was producing. I'm going to increase the quality so much more. Then your sellers are going to be able to concentrate in the good quality ones so that we can close them at a higher win rate, higher average deal size. And then you start being able to really have that change in management. So people start looking forward to see what marketing is sending to the sales side.
So tell me something. I'm going to dig a little bit more internally because this is the good stuff underneath the surface, right? Everybody's going to nod their head and they're going to say, oh, I'm going to give you less to get more as long as the quality of the deal is bigger. But then all of a sudden you're like, I have an existing, sales organization. I have X number of salespeople and they all have their quotas to hit and they're all looking for a certain percentage of the pipeline. And now you're shrinking that. This actually affects a lot operationally in what we're doing here. So you've got to have some really strong buy-in internally, and that impacts the way that you sell, the way that you're structured internally. How do you go? That's an organizational change that goes along with this. So we're not talking about easy stuff, right? It just sounds easy, right? We're going to do fewer but higher quality. Well, yeah, let's all do it. But it's a little bit more difficult than that in reality. How did you tackle that? That's alignment. That's change at a systematic level.
Yeah, I think that you're starting to talk a little bit more about the structural components that need to be in place. It's almost what happens 6 months, 1 year before this conversation that we started with. So a couple of areas that I prioritize as I take a new role, it really, and I know the word empowering is used too much. I need to think about a different word. But for today, let's use the word empowerment. You have to start by empowering your teams because it takes a village. It doesn't really mean that I am going to be attending every single meeting and convincing every single person. It really takes much more the credibility of the team. So that the sales side, because you're also going to need the IT side, the finance side. We're talking a little bit more about sales today, but it requires your CIO, it requires people on the operational side, your COO. It requires so many different parties to be involved in these kind of changes. So number one, and I actually at the Hexagon where I did this time around, is that I run a weekly session where I'm making sure that everybody in my team starts really having that credibility, that voice at the table. So when the sellers meet on daily, weekly basis with the team for other components, that credibility starts taking place. They start seeing how we think. How is it that they can trust and we're in the trenches with them? So it starts with that. I have 10 principles that I like sharing with the team, making sure that everybody is super comfortable so they can have all these different discussion because we're going to need changes in the systems, changes in compliance, changes in operations, order management, sales operations, content, product. There's so many things that it takes a village that is strong. That's like one of the portions that has to happen. Secondly, as some of the audience might know, I grew up in Japan. I grew up in a Japanese school and then in Japan many years. So I follow some of the Japanese principles of, manufacturing and doing business in Japan. And one of them is, it's called nemawashi, which really means that when you're going to be moving a tree, you don't just remove it because it's not going to flourish in the next location. I know you're going to laugh at it. You massage the roots. And then when you take it to the new location, it actually grows even better. So the same thing, now that you have empowered all these different people, you have all these different conversations to align at the different levels, to get a seat at some table. There's a lot of things that have to happen before people can trust that you're going to Potentially, you're going to give them less leads and less opportunities, but each of them is going to have so much of a better quality that they're going to be like, okay, I'm looking forward to it. And you have to have, again, senior leadership alignment. When we did this transformation at PTC, I had the EVP of sales. He was the one who kicked off the project. Whoever did the first opportunity, who closed the first deal, will get a prize. Somebody else was going to have a dinner with him. So we really showed to the troops that we both believe in what we're doing.
Tell me the difference between this, because I'm confused a little bit, right? In a very positive way. You're talking about changes in the team, empowering the team. You're talking about structural changes internally, organizational changes, procedural changes. This sounds a lot like a COO, right? Who's leading the charge here? What I love is that you are taking on, you are not saying, I am going to look at the traditional status quo of what a CMO looks at. In fact, I interview on this podcast CEOs, and I ask them, what do you want from your CMO? They never talk to me about structural, procedural, organizational changes, right? They want to hear from their CMO. But when I've got to like just stand back and say, okay, you're the expert here. He's the one that won the Forrester Programs Award because you did look at this holistically, right? That's a big takeaway. You got to think outside of the traditional bounds of what a CMO really has been tasked with. When you say owning, you really own, right? You own every aspect, and you backtrack 6 months before laying the groundwork, right? So that when we get to the point we're saying we're now restricting pipeline, it's not a cultural shock internally, right?
Because otherwise, and I think it goes back to what is the definition of the CMO? And you might follow some of the conversations that take place a little bit more in the West Coast, Silicon Valley CMOs, where it say that it shouldn't be chief marketing officer. It has to be a chief market officer, because the ING, the marketing, makes it into activities. I don't really get hired to run an event, or it's almost a waste of time and effort. Say, okay, the swag. Okay, we hiring Mariana so that we can get better swag in the booth, or that's not what gives them the big changes on what marketing by now has the obligation to bring to the table, because we all in the marketing states, we talk very proudly about the fact that 70% of the buyer's journey now happens before a customer, a prospect wants to talk to a seller. That really means that we have to take a bigger challenge, a bigger obligation, a bigger role. You can't quite say that now you own more, but you're just gonna try to change the smaller portions that we might have always. It just makes no sense. You have to think it in a much bigger way. There's gonna be a lot of buyers that are gonna be getting very close to that final decision. And if that's marketing, then you have to go back to the messaging, to the positioning, to the customer, to the operational alignment with your sellers, because the world keeps changing. So yes, I think that if you want to be making a big contribution to the business, you want to have a big career, if you want to make it to the C-suite, to the big table, you do have to think much more cohesively about the business.
I hope people are really hearing what you're saying, because am I a chief marketing officer? Am I a chief market officer? Gartner a couple of years said, hey, CMOs, you need to be much more like chief customer officers. You need to be the voice of the highest authority in your business. And then that self-service B2B buyer trend that you just brought up, I think Gartner said like 82% of companies are almost at their final decision making before they ever even want to talk to us. So guess what? That means that marketing has a much more important role in sales. We have to be getting conversations earlier in that buyer's journey. We can't be relegated to the end. Unless we are a household name and we're just going to automatically be a part of the list, which 99% of companies are not, we have to fight our way onto that list. And if they're not talking to us before they create that list, then guess what? we got to figure out how we do. How do we start that conversation earlier, right? And I know part of what you talked about is the democratization of content. So I know you're a believer in this too, that Forrester says content is the foundation for all B2B marketing. And if B2B marketing is playing a larger role in this B2B self-buyer's journey, then guess what? We got to be thinking about all of these things. This is expanded the relationship of what a CMO is today in such a large way. And if we are not understanding that and taking that bull by the horns like you're doing, then it's probably why CMOs have the shortest tenure in the C-suite.
Yes. Yes. And I think it comes from all that conversation. You just mentioned that democratization of content or PR, which is one of my favorite projects these days because it takes a village. Again, you have to make sure that content is at the core of everything that we do. Whether you want to call it that it's video, it's social media, you name it. It is how we communicate because there's gonna be all these different members of the buying group that you need to convince that it's worth talking to your sellers. And that now, again, if you want to call it 70%, 80%, all that needs to be fueled with content. And it has to be right now, even be snackable. It has to be in video. It has to be in these different formats, but it has to be created by many more people than just the one person or one group that in the old days was dedicated to maybe do an ebook or white paper once a quarter, and that will be your rock piece. And then from there you will be continuing the journey. It really has to start getting everybody's credibility. You have many more. My CEO, my current CEO, Paul Rogers, he's phenomenal. He's really working in his LinkedIn presence, showing that he's got the thought leadership that is needed, commenting, engaging. And then we have, of course, phenomenal content engine that now does snackability and puts in different formats. But you have to have a very powerful engine for the activation, but you have to have all those pieces coming together, not just by the marketing component, but really by the whole organization. And it's my role to empower our sellers, social selling, product marketing, product management. Everybody has to be able to produce content. If Kim Kardashian produces content, everybody has to produce content.
So I hosted a woman that did a study on this podcast recently, and it took 250 B2B organizations that have positive revenue growth, and they talked about what are you looking to invest in over the next year? In the three categories between people, operations, and technology, it was all content. It was content, because it is that lubricant, right?
Yeah.
Forbes magazine put it really well. They said, content marketing solves problems. Thought leadership sparks conversations. So getting earlier in that buyer's journey, we're not going to do it. Product marketing is so important at the right level. It's not going to get us into that conversation earlier, right? That conversation is going to be where we are a trusted advisor and we are looking to add value to the job of the ICP. Like where our technology or product or service might be this much of what they do, we need to understand this much about what they do and be seen as a colleague of theirs, not a vendor that is looking to sell. So I love that you're talking about this because to me, the democratization, when you say everybody needs to be a content creator, what you're really saying is that's how important content is. Guess what? You're my CEO. You need to be creating content. You're my product manager. You need to be creating content. The thought is though, how do we do that in an authentic, quality way? You use that. I'm ripping off the word you said earlier, right? Authenticity in that content. Can you tell me what you think about that? What does that mean when you talk about the authenticity of content?
It is the fact that we're selling to humans. Again, B2B, by now, I think it should be called H2H because I think when we use the word B2B, it sounds like a building, like a business, but it is a group of humans that are part of an organization. And yeah, they're thinking a little bit of a different way because it tends not to be maybe their own business and tends to be a buying group and so on. But in order to convey all those conversations, it really requires that it really requires a much bigger human, authentic conversation. Because again, if we start to think as if we were investors, it's risk against return.
Right.
And it is the same when we're looking to solve problems. Many times it's almost easier to do nothing than to create the risk if you were the one that replaced the system or you were the one that tried to do something different. But how you minimize the sense of risk is because maybe I have been following you on LinkedIn. So I know how you think. I have seen what is your thought leadership. So as a vendor, I can start trusting you at a higher level. Then there's a conversation. Maybe there's a community or there's some webinar, whatever you call it. And now I can have a conversation with another customer. If you think about it on Amazon.com, we now like more of the videos that are created by other people than by the ones that are created by the company, by the corporation per se, because you can see that it's somebody like you. So it's going to minimize the risk if you buy something that if I see a woman like me that is carrying whatever it is and putting it where it belongs and she does whatever again is needed. So I feel like, a little bit less risk. I can do it as well. And it goes to the same on our industry. Yes, we're selling into larger business, but it is a human that has to decide that is going to be willing to take the risk so that the systems will better, so that when it's on a Friday and you can go home because the system is not going to collapse, so that you're not going to get fired because you're the one who chose the wrong vendor. And for all that, there has to be, again, thought leadership, communication, engagement that happens through many ways of different forms of content. But that content has to have humanly connecting, it has to have authenticity. It cannot read as a brochure anymore. We don't want to read brochures, especially the younger generation is not even really reading as much as maybe we used to read in the old days. And for all that, you need to be able to connect. And when people read it, it's like, if I only had this, it will solve my problem. I will sleep better. I will be more successful. Like all that is part of being authentic content creators.
I love it. It's human to human. It's conversation. I asked what your definition of authentic content was, and you started out by saying it's human to human and it's conversation, right? We talk as organizations to our ICP all the time. It should be much more of a conversation. And by the way, all kinds of in surveys that have and brought this to light is that the highest performing content is the content where the voice of the customer leads the voice of the company.
Absolutely. You want to be customer-centric. You cannot be saying, oh, my product that is so amazing because, and this is where I get heavy involved in messaging at more the positioning level. My product is amazing. It's the best because I got all these characteristics. No, it's got to be more like you have a problem that I understand extremely well. I have helped other companies like you to solve it to these results. And now let me explain you how it's that the product works. But before that, there has to be a talk track that solves a problem. Otherwise, why would you be investing? You just mentioned we don't CMOs, we don't last as long. Sometimes you have to C-suite or even other roles. By now, people don't stay for so long working in a company. So you have less of a timeline to deliver results. That really means that way before that, maybe a year, maybe 2 years, you start building that trust with a vendor on LinkedIn because of the newsletter, because whatever content that they communicate to you that is authentic, that is done with quality, you start building the trust. When you can identify your problem and then you see that I might have the budget to solve my problem, let me call Steve. I've been following him and I know he has what I'm looking for.
I have to tell you that building the trust over time that you just talked about, there's a CMO that put it really well. Today's brand is tomorrow's demand. Isn't that excess at all, right?
Exactly, exactly. On the next one, you've been asking me about, you have your C-suite, you have your CEO, you have to be building that trust so that when it comes to investments in brands, those are things sometimes a little bit hard because you're not going to be getting leads or you're not going to be getting pipeline per se. But as you start building that peer conversation, that thought leadership, like all these components that position your brand, then when people know that you're in the trenches with the centers and everything that you've been doing has delivered, it's much easier as a CMO to then get buy-in for investments on the brand. That are many times a little bit harder to calculate the ROI, but by then they trust that you know how to put everything together. Because as you're larger, there's much more of the brand that helps you to carry through these conversations. But by then you can sit down with your CEO and explain compared to other conversations, how is it that the brand is extremely important because but it's leading toward the future. And if you don't have that, if you don't have that trust, as I always joke about, it's not that we sell Domino's pizza. It's
If I know we could just go on forever, and I really want to, but if there was one thing in 30 seconds, you said, one thing I want you to take away from this podcast, what would that be?
true. Number one, I think that we need to be able to speak the way that I say it. We have to speak different languages. If you're going to talk to your CFO, talk finance. If you're going to talk to your CEO, talk strategy. If you're going to talk to your CRO, talk pipeline and deals. Speak in a way that gains that alignment, which takes me to the second component. You have to have alignment so that you can go and do all these bigger things that would allow you to build the trust that is going to translate into business.
I love it. I know there's going to be people that have questions. And so would it be okay if I put out your link to your LinkedIn profile that people could get a hold of you?
Absolutely. I love having conversations. I try to comment as much as I can because I think it's really exciting. So absolutely, I would love to hear from everybody via LinkedIn.
Mariana, thank you for coming on. And I think these aren't just investment banker perspectives, but I think as an investment banker, I think of somebody that looks at every angle, just really does the analytical approach on this, and how you masterfully just looked at all of the different alignment factors, the different departments, the processes, the procedures, lining it up 6 months in advance. I'm tired. I'm going to go take a nap, but I think you just did a fantastic job. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. I had a lot of fun, and thank you for everybody joining us today.